Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, July 28th, 2015. We're getting into the week here. A lot of stuff to talk about today here. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick program note, in our third hour today, Michael Everett of Fortress Survival will be spending time with us talking about survival preparedness. We seem to be going out of the time period where that's a fashionable trend. Even as indications are, it is perhaps more necessary than ever before. Well, if you're watching Fox News for most of the morning, the big story was how NFL player Tom Brady deliberately destroyed his cell phone before this meeting about Deflategate and big deal. Who cares? This is just more connotation. Fox News does not want to report on certain things, and they have moved on to Planned Parenthood, which I think is a little more relevant to us all than deflated footballs. And my apology to the football fanatics out there, but it is a game. The big news, and it's not getting very much coverage for obvious reasons, Jonathan Pollard, the Israeli spy, sentenced to life in prison, is going to be paroled by the U.S. government November 20th. Remember, earlier they announced it, big outcry, and then said, oh, it's probably not going to happen. Yes, they just announced that Pollard will be pardoned November 20th. Now, under the normal, will be paroled, not pardoned, will be paroled. Now, under the terms of the parole, normally he would be required to remain in the United States for 5 additional years. But, of course, Israel wants him back because he's a big hero and they've named streets after him. And yeah, they're going to have statues and party because, Jonathan Pollard proved that loyalty to Israel should be above loyalty to the country in which you happen to live. And they're already saying that Barack Obama could grant him clemency for the parole, which means that Pollard could be off to Israel for a hero's welcome November 20th. And this is infuriating because Pollard stole critical, secret, classified information from the U.S. government, in particular the targeting policies of the U.S. nuclear deterrent against the Soviet Union. And he sold it to Israel, who then turned around, our supposed only friend in the Middle East, traded that information to the Soviet Union in exchange for increased immigration quotas for Russian Jews to move to Israel. And Israel's excuse for Pollard, all these years they've been trying to get him free, is, well, look, Israel and the U.S. are friends, and Israel should have had this information anyway, so why is it such a big deal? Well, considering what Israel did with that information, no, they shouldn't have had it. Because clearly they would have betrayed they did betray American interests. They gave nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union. Had the U.S. gone to a nuclear war at that time, the U.S. would have lost against the Soviet Union. And as part of my coverage of this, I put a link over to the FBI's official online story about the famous Atom spy case, where there were all these spies. Julius Ethel Rosenberg were the ones who paid the supreme price, but there were other people in there. And the Rosenbergs were sentenced to death. And there was a big hue and cry about, oh, we can't let these people, go. And the president said, I'm not going to intervene. This was a major betrayal of U.S. military secrets that eventually wound up in the hands of our mortal enemies, the commies. And today we have a government that grovels before Tel Aviv and sends their spy back. Anyway, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here. Bernard up in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi. Well, what I wanted to mention was something you brought up yesterday. Now, there's a book published in Canada a few years ago, and the reason it was a couple of top journalists. There was so much resistance and threats and intimidation, and they thought their infant was in danger. They could have been killed. So this book is called Kiss the Boys Goodbye, How the United States Betrayed Its Own POWs in Vietnam.
Yes.
Now, in reference to, you mentioned about the what's his name, Donald Trump,
okay.
and the Vietnam veteran that was running for the Republicans.
John McCain.
McCain.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting there, you think that the most startling issue, as you mentioned yesterday, that could be questioned would be about the missing prisoners of war, which McCain does not seem to show much interest in. But what was amazing about this book is as you probably know, the active role that Ross Perot played in investigating the missing prisoners of war. And he was described as a presidential investigator. He seemed to have really good connections with President Reagan, but later on, Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush put an end to it. He said, cease and desist. But he said he went over there, and there was all this drug smuggling and everything else, and he was quite concerned, and he had a lot of resources and a lot of focus. But it seems like that maybe is too big an issue to deal with, maybe because some former CIA guy said that they were instructed to neutralize Ross Perot. And it doesn't mean they try to do it without being too messy, but they seem to get him out of the race,
Well, there's a lot of that going on. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Bo Greitz, and he put out a video quite a long time ago. I had a VHS copy, which has unfortunately gone missing in all the moves. I wish he'd put it out on DVD. And basically, he blows the whistle on the fact that the CIA was, in fact, running heroin out of Vietnam back to the United States during the Vietnam War. Now, today, with most people understanding that the U.S. intelligence agencies are running heroin out of Afghanistan, it's not that big of a shock. But certainly to the Vietnam-era generation, the idea that the war was being perpetuated in order to allow the CIA and Air America to bring more heroin back to the United States to sell into the black communities, that was very shocking. A lot of people had trouble believing it, but Bo Greitz had the documentation, and he named the names, and he showed how money that was being allocated by the government for drug law enforcement over in Southeast Asia was actually being diverted to build an ultra-modern highway right up to the door of Kun Sa's opium plantation to make it easier for the trucks to get up there and get the drugs out. And it is a horrible corruption, but drug corruption is part of our nation's history. The Skull and Bones Fraternity at Yale University was originally funded with opium money. We know that certainly there's the Iran-Contra scandal, gun running and cocaine running, and that tangled into the Clintons up there in Arkansas. It's part of our nation's history. They don't want you to know that because most people would be shocked to find out the biggest drug smuggler in the country is the government itself.
Yeah. Yeah, we had, of course, Gary Webb and Michael Rupert, of course, who both seem to pay quite a serious price for doing serious investigations on that very thing.
Yeah, anybody who gets too close to the truth, they do pay a horrible price. I was talking the other day about a book that I saw down in Australia called Operation Black Eagle, which was basically saying the real reason that the U.S. invaded Panama and grabbed Noriega to throw him in a prison in Florida was that Noriega was trying to blackmail the Bush family with their part of this cocaine and gun running operation that was going through, part of which was going through Panama. Yeah.
Well, it seems like if it weren't for alternate news sources like yourselves, and then there was a film, of course, Panama Deception, that was quite shocking about some of what went on there and the different weapons they were trying out and stuff like that. So
yeah,
anyway, I'm glad to have
it's nasty, and the reason the CIA has been involved in all of this drug running is this is where they get their money for operations that are not approved by the U.S. Congress. And it's all considered off the books, and they can go out and do what they think is best and not tell Congress what's going on.
Well, I know that's true, but you know what Michael Rupert said? Of course, he was an LAPD narcotics officer, and the CIA tried to recruit him to get involved with their deal because his parents had high-level security, so he had to have high-level security already. But he said the ultimate reason why they have to keep the narcotics flowing is because the amount of cash involved, which is probably about $1 trillion, without that liquid cash running through that.
We got to let you go for commercials. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, we've mentioned many times that ISIS appears to be a manufactured foe by the U.S. government. Basically, it's Washington, D.C.'s version of Emmanuel Goldstein from George Orwell's 1984, where the government created a villain for everybody to have their 2-minute hate and yell and scream at, and to justify all the imposed poverty and a perpetual state of war. It was all the fault of Emmanuel Goldstein. We saw the U.S. government do this with Al-Qaeda, which whoever was opposing U.S. policy in their own country, oh, they must be Al-Qaeda. We don't need to listen to their complaints about what's going on. They're Al-Qaeda. Let's just go and kill them. And then, of course, it became really obvious that Al-Qaeda was a fake because so many of them were exposed. Adam Gadon, the American Al-Qaeda, turned out his real name is Adam Perlman. He's the grandson of a member of the board of directors of the Anti-Defamation League. Yusuf al-Khattab, who ran the Revolution Muslim website out of Brooklyn. His real name is Joseph Cohen. And as it turns out, Al-Qaeda in Arabic means the base, and is thought to have come from the CIA for the database of the Mujahideen fighters who aided the United States against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. But in Arabic slang, Al-Qaeda means a toilet. So whoever came up with Al-Qaeda really didn't understand Arab colloquialisms, and that's a dead giveaway there, because if you're a terror group and you show up and you say, I'm from the toilet, I'm going to blow up your buildings, and everybody starts snickering, and then we have to get Jeff Dunham and Ahmed over here to say, silence, I kill you. So Al-Qaeda has been retired, and they brought forward the understudy, ISIS, which has been made the villain through all these very expensively, professionally produced videos of horrific things. And then from then on, the U.S. justifies invasions of other countries like Syria by saying, oh, ISIS is there. We have to go after ISIS. We're not really making war on Assad and the Syrian people. We're just only going after ISIS. And anywhere that the people of a nation are trying to kick out their U.S. puppet rulers, oh, they're just ISIS. You don't need to listen to their complaints about life under U.S. foreign rule. They're just ISIS. You can ignore them. And we're seeing that in Libya, in Yemen, and especially in Iraq. And reinforcing that here is this story that came out of RINF.com proclaiming a tremendous victory by the Iraq Air Force for bombing what they described as an ISIS-controlled university complex near the city of Ramadi. So we're supposed to think ISIS are all these flag-waving, beheading maniacs, and yet we're being told this university complex was under the control of ISIS. It sounds to me like the university complex was under the control of the people of Iraq who are sick and tired of U.S. puppet rule. We'll just call them ISIS, no matter how absurd the idea of an ISIS-controlled university may seem in the context of the propaganda war. So, NATO is now backing Turkey in its war against terrible acts of terror, and Erdogan is now out there openly saying it's impossible to continue the peace process with the Kurdish militants. Just a few days ago, the Kurds were saying we're being shelled from Turkey, and Turkey said, no, we're not doing it. Now they've done a complete reversal and say, yeah, we're shelling the Kurds. We have to get rid of them before we can consider any kind of a peace deal with Syria. So the war is going on. They're talking about an ISIS-free zone, which is, in reality, it's a no-fly zone. And it's not going to affect ISIS because ISIS doesn't have a lot of warplanes. In fact, I don't think they really have any that are combat capable. This is about keeping Assad's air force away from the invading army from Turkey as they start gnawing away bits and bits at Syria, the way they did with Iraq. Now, up in Donbass, there's been a mass protest by the citizenry there against the OSCE, who are being accused of covering up the worst of the atrocities committed by the Kiev regime in violation of the Minsk Accords. And they're now denouncing that OSCE is simply another propaganda tool of Washington to try and make Kiev look good and the independent Eastern Ukrainian republics look bad. How dare you lead the slavery of the European Union? You're not allowed to do that. And the irony there, of course, is that earlier this week, we had a member of the parliament in Kiev saying that Ukraine cannot meet the requirements for EU membership anyway, for at least 5 years. They're hovering at the edge of a default. Now, over in Turkey, somebody blew up the natural gas pipeline running from Iran to Turkey, set off a huge fire, shut down the flow of natural gas. The fire has been extinguished. They're going to have to repair the pipeline, but somebody's already out there reminding us what these wars are really all about: control of the oil and gas and the profits thereby, and most importantly, from the U.S. point of view, which currency oil and gas will be traded in. Now, we're seeing a continued backlash against presidential hopeful Mike Huckabee and his comments about how the deal with Iran, the P5+1 deal, opens the door to the ovens, and there's going to be a new Holocaust in Iran, or they're new Nazis, and they're just waiting for the time to exterminate all the Jewish people, blah, 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 blah. And he's out there proving that he is, at least right now, leading in the contest as to who can kiss Israel's ass hardest, deepest, and wettest. And it's backflashed on him. The Israeli envoy was out there saying this ovens remark was inappropriate. Poor Huckabee has managed to tick off just everybody with that stunt. It was way over the top. Everybody sees it as blatant pandering to Israel's agenda, and even the Israelis are unhappy about that. Now, I am very concerned about what Israel's going to do if the deal can't be derailed. And they're back to a full court press today. They've got everybody all over the media. We've got to stop the Iran deal. It gives Iran everything they want, and the U.S. gets nothing. Well, actually, to be technically accurate, the U.S. gets a mechanism to ensure Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, which they weren't anyway. All Iran gets is their own money back. We're not giving Iran a penny. We're simply giving back all of Iran's money that was locked up with the sanctions. Everybody's trying to act like this is a huge multi-billion-dollar giveaway to Iran. No, it isn't. We're just letting them take back control of their own money, as opposed to Israel, where the taxpayers are looted to pour money all over them. Now, we're coming up here on a commercial break. When we come on back, I'm very concerned about indicators coming out of Israel that they may be on the verge of doing something very, very dramatic indeed, and I'll elucidate further after these words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get into Israel, I want to take you all back to an interesting aspect of the Oklahoma City bombing, the Murrah Federal Building, which was, according to the official story, blown up by a Ryder rental truck full of fertilizer. And, of course, that has already been debunked, including by top government weapons experts. Could not happen. Had to be additional charges inside the building, which the corporate media reported on day one and then immediately erased. But there's an interesting story because it came out that in the months leading up to the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building, the BATF had been running a test program out in New Mexico, building and test detonating truck bombs. Because if you're going to have a staged false flag terror attack with a truck bomb, it's going to be really embarrassing if it actually doesn't work. So you got to, make sure it's actually going to go off. Now, the gentleman who was in charge of the BATF's program in New Mexico, building and test detonating truck bombs, was a gentleman named Harry Everhart, who just, in an amazing coincidence, was standing a block away from the Murrah building when it blew up. And he got on his cell phone and proclaimed the first official report: the Murrah building has been brought down by a truck bomb with AMFO. So, with that story in mind, we need to flash back here to a couple of months ago where it came out that Israel has been test detonating dirty bombs at a site down in the Negev desert. Now, dirty bombs, they sound scarier than they really are. It's basically a conventional bomb that has been laced with some kind of radioactive material, which is not going to go any further, really, than the bomb damage itself. But it sounds real scary. It's a dirty bomb. Radioactive. It'll empty an entire city. No, you can clean up after it. And Israel's been doing that. Test detonating radioactively tainted bombs and cleaning them up out there in the desert. And this is kind of interesting because even Israel admits Nobody's ever actually used a dirty bomb. Ever. It hasn't happened. But they're out there practicing how to make them go bang. Now, remember, not too long ago, Netanyahu came out and said that if this Iran deal went through and he wasn't able to derail it using his whores in the U.S. Congress, that Israel would just unilaterally attack Iran, which would make Israel look really bad unless Israel can manufacture a reason. And the fact that they're using radioactively tagged explosives in these tests says Iran is the target, because none of the other nations in the area outside of Iran and Israel have the radioactive material. We did a flashback story here from earlier just this year, where the French member of the parliament was out there saying that Israel's going to attack Iran if this deal goes through. So everybody knows that's in the offing. And just yesterday we got word of a massive, massive reserve call-up in Israel. Supposedly it's a drill, but they're basically getting everybody ready to go. And between that and the testing of dirty bombs that Israel has built, it looks to me like Israel's going to set off this dirty bomb someplace unimportant, upwind of the Palestinians probably, and say, oh my goodness, Iran has attacked us, the war is on. And you Americans have to come help us finish this. Now, to find out if you're being fed a lie, remember, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a motive for Iran to carry out any kind of an attack against Israel right now. Iran wanted this deal. The deal is going through. Iran is going to get its own wealth unlocked. Why would Iran wreck that with some kind of a dirty bomb attack against Israel? And the answer is they wouldn't. This is Israel wanting to make war on Iran and make it look like Iran somehow deserves it, which is what they do. By way of deception, thou shalt do war. It's the motto of the Mossad. Anyway, they've got all of their heavyweights out here in the American corporate media. John Bolton was over there on the Alan Colmes show saying he wants to strike Iran. We have to go on out there. And to his credit, Alan Colmes just basically gave John Bolton enough rope to hang himself. Come out looking like these just drooling, fanatic, war hawk. He wants Iran destroyed, and he wants other people's children to do it. And, of course, for John Bolton and everybody else out there saying, we've got to strike Iran, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA torture centers. Have fun. We're going to sit this one out. Because all of these wars are being started with lies. Now, here's another interesting article. This was over in Breitbart. And it's one of these articles saying that, that we've got to look at the financial implications. This Iran deal is worth more to Iran than all the U.S. aid to Israel since 1948. Well, that's not entirely accurate when you total up all the aid to Israel, official, unofficial, under-the-counter, forgiven loans and everything. The American taxpayer has been forced to give to Israel something like 20 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program, and we are still waiting for a giant leap for mankind, or even a modern version of Velcro, out of all that money. And the spin on this article is, well, we've got to give more money to Israel because look at how much we're giving to Iran. And here is the point. All that money that Israel gets is taken from you, the American taxpayer. The money that Iran is going to be getting is theirs to begin with, earned by them before being frozen, or let's call it what it is, stolen by the U.S. sanctions. Nobody is giving Iran anything that is not already their property. And the spin there is, we can count that Iran will spend that money on bad stuff, and we've got civil forfeiture laws here. We don't need to prove they're running drugs or building bombs. We should just take that money from them. Now, earlier today I was watching Fox News, and they are still running this story occasionally, where Fox News claims the majority of the American people want Congress to vote down the Iran deal. And I guess they must be polling the AIPAC membership. We ran a poll on our website this morning. 91% want Congress to approve the Iran deal. We just put up a video over at WhatReallyHappened.com where the majority of Jewish Americans are saying Congress should vote to approve the deal. Fox News is just out there lying, trying to create this myth that America wants war with Iran. No, we don't. We've had enough wars. We're sick and tired of wars. We're sick and tired of our kids coming back from these battlegrounds in wheelchairs and cheap metal boxes, all over this argument over whose brand of ink and paper the world is going to use for global trade and buying and selling natural gas, which is what these wars are all about. 5 former U.S. ambassadors to Israel have sent a letter to Congress saying, back this deal. This is something that has to go through. And here is a point to keep in mind. With the United Nations having already unanimously ratified this deal, all Congress can do is take the United States out. They can't end the deal. The rest of the P5+1 are going to move forward. And that means the U.S. is going to be seen as the rogue nation. The U.S. will be cut off from Iranian natural gas and petroleum products. The U.S. will be cut off from Iranian markets for our products. Not that we make anything Iran would really want to buy anyway. But it's going to harm the United States far more than it will harm Iran. But Israel's out there desperate to prove they're still in charge of the United States of America. And I hope you will join me in sending the message to Israel, no, you are not. We the people run this country. We'll be right back. Well, America, welcome back to the show. Now, Israel loves to keep on wagging Nazis at us all, and Hollywood helps them do it. And let's be honest, whatever it is that happened or did not happen, did so before pretty much all of us were even born. But Israel wants to keep us locked in the 1940s. They can't stand the idea that we all want to live in the 21st century. And they're dealing with a real problem. They're running out of real Nazis to put on our show trials. I mean, they're down to the guys who were feeding the dogs, doing the bookkeeping. It's amazing here. Now, despite all of this caterwauling about the Nazis and how bad they were, Israel continues to show that they've got a kind of a blindness going on here, because they're always willing to scream Nazi at other nations' behavior without ever looking at their own. And we're getting back to this story. There's another village in Palestine. Israel wants to simply shut it down and move them out of there. They're too close to one of the illegal settlements. And the entire justification for displacing this village is the crime of not being Jewish. And remember, that was something the Nazis did. It was called ethnic cleansing. Relocate entire populations for not being Aryan enough. But of course, when the Nazis do it, it's a bad thing. But when Israel does it, it's empowerment, it's justice, it's the verdict of history, so forth and so on. Now, speaking of bovine excrement pouring out of the newspapers, over at the Daily Telegraph, they ran this story about Vladimir Putin. The spin is, Russia's the warmonger, Russia's the aggressor, Putin is worse than Hitler, and, we have to do something about it. And all of this comes out of a comment that Putin made that was actually very reasoned. What the Daily Telegraph is calling aggressive rhetoric is talking about comments made by Putin and the Russian ambassadors saying that nobody should assume that Russia is another Iraq or Libya or Serbia or Afghanistan or Yemen. Russia is a military peer who is willing to defend their borders and interests. This, in the Daily Telegraph, is aggressive, provocative rhetoric proving that Putin is the bad guy. And, of course, not a mention over the fact that all of this bloodshed going on in Ukraine started January of last year with the U.S.-backed coup d'etat against the legitimate government and the installation of a junta, a U.S. puppet ruler. Because according to the Daily Telegraph, U.S. juntas are good and democratically elected governments are bad. Remember how Henry Kissinger justified the overthrow of Chile's Salvador Allende, saying the issues were too important to leave to the Chilean voters? That's their attitude. They're in favor of democracy only when you're voting for what they want. If you're voting the other way, oh, no, we must intervene. These voters, they don't see the big picture. They're not looking at corporate profits and projection of power. They just want lives of peace and prosperity, and that just cannot be allowed to happen here. Now, we're finding out that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are deployed all across Eastern Europe this summer. They're building roads and training facilities, and the overt purpose is the U.S. government wanting to reassure our European allies that we are there on the ground, we are prepared to defend them against Russian aggression. And my first comment is, gee, can't we get these U.S. Army engineers to fix some of the roads in this country that are falling apart? Oh, no, it's important that we send the right message to Eastern Europe. And we know what they're building. They're building military roads in advance of a war with Russia. They're actually crazy enough to be preparing for a war with Russia. Now, Switzerland, that we normally don't think of as behaving like this, apparently sent some of their army helicopters across the border with France. And what they did is they scooped up a bunch of water from a mountain lake to fly it back into Switzerland to deal with a water shortage that's affecting their dairy cattle. And I think if Switzerland had asked nicely, France would have said, sure, yeah, always happy to help out. But there's a big stink now because the government of Switzerland didn't ask France permission to go scooping up water, didn't inform them ahead of time it was going to happen, and apparently these Army helicopters scared a bunch of tourists in some of these French resort towns. It's very unusual behavior. Now, over at the Scottish Independence Party, Scottish National Party, the former First Minister Alex Salmond is out there saying, at this point, given the abuses by the British Crown and the known massive vote fraud in the last independence referendum, he's saying a second independence referendum for Scotland is now inevitable. And people are angry. They're going to be looking for vote fraud. Anybody caught rigging the elections are going, well, they'll have William Wallace skin them and make another belt out of them, I guess. They're not going to be, Britain is not going to be able to steal a second referendum election because everybody knows that's what they did the last time. Good for Scotland. They should be free. They really should. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, those roads are great paved, especially when the U.S. and the rest of the European military got to retreat.
Yeah, that's probably where they're going to get the most use out of them. And being military roads, they're probably built very well with proper drainage and concrete foundation and everything, as opposed to what we've got, at least here on this island, which is every time another hole opens up, they just slap some macadam over it, and the next time it rains, the void opens up again, there's another pothole. We've got the worst roads in the entire country. This according to the National Department of Transportation.
Well, New Jersey ain't that much better either.
No, I don't think it is. And it's, we've reached the stage in this country where the government's agenda, if you will, is not about actually fixing problems. Just make it look good until the next election. Plaster it over, pave it over, paint it over, paint and new tar, and it'll look good. And, the fact that it's all rotting underneath and the water mains are breaking and the bridges are collapsing, that's somebody else's problem to deal with.
Yeah, Mike, on the Russian thing, I said it before, this is all based on the economy coming to a full, the time's run out. Time run out for the U.S. and the U.K. and the Western world.
It really is. And what it comes down to, when before Putin took control of Russia's central bank. We were all buddy-buddy. Putin was doing what the West wanted him to do. Putin was doing what the U.S. wanted him to do, enslave his people to a privately owned central bank. And all of a sudden Putin turns around and says, I think Russia needs a public currency that's managed as a public utility. And that was the day that Putin was put on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. And we've got, like Paul Craig Roberts is out there saying, the U.S. is going to go to war with Russia and China because Russia and China will not obey dictates from Washington, D.C.
People don't realize how big Russia and China is combined. I mean, the U.S. has a big military, obviously, and we're all over the world, but we're not all there in one spot. And to get there in one spot, forget about it. You'll never defeat the Russian and the Chinese, and anybody who thinks that you can is just living in some fantasy land. We'll lose. And we'll lose bad, and people better, wise up.
Yeah, that's really the situation here. Our current troops are exhausted; they're demoralized. Our latest weapons are hideously expensive. Now they're talking about robotic war machines, running Windows Vista or some such nonsense as that. And every time these things get into the real world, they do great in the testing for the Pentagon to get the contracts awarded, and every time they get out in the real world, they just turn out to be expensive, non-functional junk. And we're sending our kids into a war against Russia and China with stuff that doesn't work. F-22 still asphyxiating its pilots. F-35, huge volume of problems. We're going to be talking about that a little bit more in the show. But yeah, a major reason I'm opposed to this new war, we're going to lose this one. And that means it's going to go nuclear at some point. Anyway, Dustin, I need to let you go. We got to take a break for our top of the hour news, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Let's talk about the economy a little bit. The International Monetary Fund has come out saying that the European Central Bank is going to have to extend the money printing to get the Eurozone moving. In other words, creating lots and lots of new money out of thin air to give to the bankers to make their bottom line look like it's healthy. But we've already had statements from no less than the Bank of International Settlements that this free and easy, cheap money for the bankers isn't actually improving the economy. They can prop up the stock market like they did today here in the U.S., creating all this new money and allow the brokerages to buy up stocks. But it's not actually improving the real economy. There's no job creation. There's no infrastructure development. There's no industry creation. It's just this made-up fictional money circulating among the money junkies, shaking it back and forth as hard as they can and say, see, everything looks good. If it looks good, it is good. Nothing more. And sooner or later, it's going to catch up with them. Because all this newly created money represents new debt. That's the way these private central banks operate. And everybody is hovering at the edge of default or already over. And plunging them further into debt does not solve the problem. As we can see down in Greece. And Greece is already showing the signs of the entire system locking up. Their retail sector is in serious trouble. More stores are closing because ordinary Greek people don't have any money to buy things with. And as the retail stores close, their supply chains lose business. They close. The manufacturers and producers of products, they go out of business. Without a healthy consumer economy, no nation can survive. And that's exactly what's going on. Tax evasion in Greece is now 50%. Half the people of Greece are simply refusing to pay their taxes. Moody's is reporting that Greek savings deposits over 100,000 euros may be taken in another haircut, scalping, castration, whatever you want to call it. IMF is saying the Eurozone outlook is bad. And it's not just there. Puerto Rico does not have the cash on hand for their next bond payment due next month. And Greece is not going to make their next bond payment. And they're out there saying, well, it's not a default, it's a deferred payment, and just anything they can say to keep the derivatives from kicking in. total global exposure on these derivatives is $1.5 quadrillion. More than the entire planet is actually worth. And it's all numbers and games in computers and ledgers. None of it is real. Banking is not a science. It is a religion. It's a set of arbitrary rules that we are brainwashed to believe in that benefit the clergy, in this case, the bankers. You will believe this is the way the world is supposed to be. You will believe you must live your life by these rules. You will believe that you're not allowed to engage in any commerce without the blessing of their most exalted lordships, the bankers. They really do want to take this planet back to feudalism and serfdom. U.S. home ownership rates dropped to 63.4%. That's the lowest home ownership rate since 1967. It's a 48-year low. Rents are up. Median asking rent soars to an all-time high. Oh, home ownership, that part of the American dream, that's gone here. You're all going to be tenants. Forget about being citizens. Forget about this nation belonging to we the people. You're all renters and tenants to the bankers now. That's your role in this society. Meanwhile, up in Ithaca, New York, the city has launched its own internal digital currency to allow their local economy to function as access to this lent money from the Federal Reserve continues to dry up. Remember what we were reporting on yesterday, where the Federal Reserve has notified the 8 largest banks in this country to build up their cash reserves, which is another way of saying that the credit lines are drying up. Maybe really low interest rates on those loans, but they're not going to be lending the cash out. So Ithaca, New York has started their own internal digital currency. This is the 21st century version of what we saw in the United States during the Depression of the 1930s and during the Civil War, where local communities simply came up with their own currency to allow commerce to proceed because the state-issued currency was utterly worthless and untrustworthy. And to show you where the money junkies are going with all of this, this one got a lot of people upset. This is being reported over in Russia today, and it involves a columnist for the Sun in Great Britain. And she's Katie Hopkins. She's considered a media personality, talking head. And she went out there basically saying that it's time to consider euthanasia bans because Britain has far too many old people. Really, they're just a strain on the economy. They should have died long ago. So here we have the British media, and I realize the Sun is not considered top of the heap, but they're still putting it out there. And apparently this lady had an interview with the Radio Times, and she says, just because medical science can make people live longer, that's not the right path to choose. We've got way too many old people. It's ridiculous to be living in a country where we can put dogs to sleep but not people. Obviously, Britain and a lot of other governments are thinking that the way they're going to get out of the mess they created by embezzling the retirement funds of their own workers is to simply kill the workers off. We've already heard whining in the American media about, Social Security would be fine if these old people just weren't living so long. They should die as soon as they're no longer useful to the system. And we know the real reason the Social Security Trust Fund is in trouble, because starting with the Clinton administration, they started borrowing, the cash surplus built up for the baby boomers and spending it as general revenues. That's where Bill Clinton got his magic federal budget surplus. He embezzled the money of the American workers, because that Social Security Trust Fund does not belong to the government. It belongs to you, the American people. And they borrowed and spent the money. They can't redeem the Treasury bonds they put in its place. And that's why there's a Social Security crisis, and we have to raise taxes, and we have to cut benefits. And really, all you old people, the loyal, patriotic thing to do is to just die as soon as you're not able to work any longer. That's where this is all going. all these governments that looted the retirement funds of their older workers, their solution is we should just get rid of the older workers. It's right out of Logan's Run. As soon as you reach 30, just kill them off. All right, let's talk about Hillary Clinton. She's in serious trouble from a lot of different areas here, and apparently more people are saying what is really destroying her, first and foremost, are the games with the email server. And there's nothing she can say to explain it away or justify it that is really working, because Hillary Clinton is approaching this problem from the point of view of a lawyer. What can be proven, what loopholes were in the law, how do we interpret it? But the voter isn't a lawyer, and politics is perception. And everything Hillary Clinton is doing to deal with this scandal comes off making her look like another weasel wording, opportunistic, exploit a loophole, lawyer-type politician. It's causing more and more damage, and she can't get away from it. But she's going to try. Details when we come back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Hillary Clinton, and she's now trying to find other issues to hide behind to get the public's mind off of the email servers, Benghazi, Vince Foster, Cattlegate, the whole slew. And so apparently over the weekend, Hillary decided to get onto the bandwagon for human-caused global warming. She's up in Des Moines, Iowa, and doing this speech where she's out there saying it's hard to believe there are people running for president who still refuse to accept the settled science of climate change, who would rather remind us they're not scientists and listen to those who are. Harumph, harumph, harumph. Hillary then departed from that speech, getting onto a luxury private jet that burns 347 gallons of fuel every single hour, which shows her commitment to fighting climate change. And here's where it gets really interesting, because apparently somebody who was there for this diatribe coming out of Des Moines, Iowa, posted a tweet from their cell phone camera saying that there was nobody there. They set up her little podium and the American flag, and they couldn't get anybody to come in there. It was an empty room. And she made the speech for the benefit of the campaign video cameras and then took off. Absolutely empty room. And Hillary is raising on a busted flush on this global warming nonsense, because the indications are we're going to have another brutal winter. The carbon Nazis are already out there saying, oh yes, it's going to be a rough winter because of human-caused global warming. Because, warming causes cold, freezing winters, which of course is not what they were saying back in 2000 when they were saying snowfalls are going to be a thing of the past. And they're out there trying to figure out some way they can say, well, no, actually global warming causes growing ice caps. And yes, Al Gore was wrong to say the Arctic would be ice-free last summer. But, we've got a whole new theory why, human-caused global warming is real, and we get the snow and ice. And you should never, ever doubt the revealed holy dogma of human-caused global warming, the Church of St. Al of the Gore, and certainly should not question it when Obama hit you with a carbon tax. Straining credulity. Now then, the other tactic that Hillary is fanning up is feminism. She's out there screaming about how her campaign represents the empowerment of women, who are being discriminated against by the GOP and on, ignoring the fact that actually there's an equal number of women running on both parties right now. There is no bias. It's the same number of female candidates, Republican side, Democratic side. But facts never got in the way of a good speech by Hillary, and she's out there screaming about how women are victimized and women are abused, not mentioning, of course, how Hillary herself abused all the women who complained about the way her husband Bill Clinton was treating, the bimbo eruptions. You want to find out what Hillary really thinks about women who are being sexually harassed? Go ask Paula Jones. Go ask Jennifer Flowers. Go ask any of these dozens and dozens of women how Hillary really thinks sexual harassment complaints should be handled. So, fanning up the fires and the flame and the rest of it, there's a guy named David Lissack. And he's an associate professor at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, and he wrote a report on the epidemic of campus rape. and how it's, campus offenders are violent sociopaths who use sophisticated strategies to groom their targets and terrify and coerce their victims into submission. And, of course, he's immediately a darling of the liberal media. He was cited in a documentary, The Hunting Ground, about campus rape. The only problem is nobody ever took a look at his actual report. They just wanted to hear the conclusions. Oh, there's a rape crisis. We've got to get a feminist candidate. And it turns out that his paper relied on survey data that he did not collect. Somebody just handed him the survey data and says, here, take this, write a report. And apparently the survey data was for incidents of rape in general, not limited to campuses. And if you're my age, you recognize what's going on, because we saw this back in the 1990s when the Clintons were building their coalition, where the original equity feminism was hijacked and turned into the male bash militant gender feminism movement. All men are rapists, and even if they're not, you should accuse them anyway, because false accusations of rape are good for a man to go through. That actually came from Catherine Comans, the Assistant Dean of Student Activity at Vassar University, was actually quoted in Time magazine saying a false accusation of rape is a good thing for a man to have to go through. And that was in the wake of the revelation that a lot of innocent guys had been sent to jail for false accusations of rape. And the National Organization of Women was out there absolutely saying, do not dare use a DNA test. How dare you question women being truthful about their accusations of rape? And there were a lot of activist groups who said, look, presumption of innocence, there's no evidence this guy did this. There was one guy, Gary Dotzen, went to prison for 6 years before his accuser finally confessed and said, I picked him at random. I didn't want my parents to know I was having sex with my boyfriend, so when Mom spotted telltale stains, I just picked this guy out at random. Sent him to jail for 6 years. There was an incident in, this was the era of the rape hoax, where the FBI came out and said rape was the second most falsely reported crime in the entire country. Because if you had a really spectacular rape story, you were guaranteed a slot on Donahue and Oprah, and you were the darling of daytime TV talk shows. And there was one case up in Davis, California, where this woman claimed that she had been gang raped by skateboarding teens on the median of the main highway going through town. And even though there were no witnesses to corroborate her claim, National Organization of Women went in there. They were screaming, this proves that men were beasts and had to be controlled. And Davis, California was literally on the verge of passing a male-only curfew, where after sundown only women could leave their homes and go shopping and the rest of it, when the hoax was finally exposed. And when the hoax was exposed, the first thing now did was denounce the victim, saying, oh, she'd been bought off by the patriarchy. So if you remember all of that stuff from the 1990s, and there's a lot of documentation about it, clearly they're trying to build the same thing again to convince women they're oppressed, that they're, that they're the victim of out-of-control male rapists. And if you really believe that, give all these women a gun. Oh, no, you can't have a gun. Just live in fear of the male rapist and vote for Hillary Clinton. That's what's going on. We're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show. And there's kind of an interesting article over in Raw Story, Ted Cruz and the Politics of Faith and Fear, how the GOP mastered the art of exploiting scared Christians. Hardly alone with that. Israel's also succeeded in doing that, the so-called Christian Zionists. But there's an interesting quote in this, and it's coming from Rick Santorum. And basically the article's talking about how all these candidates are going out to rallies being held at churches, and they'll get on their knees and pray and just do all the whatever it takes to convince the Christians that we're one of yours. So Santorum is out there saying, last month I was in Israel, and one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's advisors told me, Senator, you need to tell the American people that the next president the country elects will have to be a wartime president. Now, that's a little absurd when you consider we've had wartime presidents going all the way back to George Bush the Elder. What Netanyahu is really saying is he wants the American people to elect a war for Israel president. because Netanyahu is convinced that Obama is just not willing to fling enough American sons and daughters onto Israel's enemies, and that cannot be allowed to stand. All right, now there's a very interesting article over in IBN.US, and it is a lengthy legal discussion about the concept of a natural-born citizen as it relates to the requirements for the presidency of the United States of America. And we are seeing this attempt by Ted Cruz's supporters to just explain away the fact that he was actually born in Canada. Only one of his parents was an American citizen, but still somehow he's qualified under the Constitution to run for the presidency. And they're trying to equate people who are wondering about Cruz's qualifications with the Obama birthers and all the rest of that. They're trying to blur the issue. One of the big talking points Cruz's supporters are putting out there is that while you and I and everybody else understand that natural-born citizen means one who was born in this country, that because natural-born citizen has never had a formal legal definition created by the Supreme Court or the Congress, that it doesn't matter how you and I see it. They will say that it basically means anybody who's born of any U.S. citizen anywhere in the world can be the President of the United States. That was certainly not the intention of the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers wanted the leadership of this nation to remain in the hands of those born within this nation. Now, there are some reasonable exceptions, such as being born of American citizen parents in a foreign U.S. military base, the Canal Zone, that's how McCain got in. But Ted Cruz was born in Canada. His mother was American. His father was, I think if I recall correctly, Cuban, but became a naturalized citizen. Cruz is ineligible to run for the president. Deal with it. And all of Cruz's people have come out saying, well, you turned a blind eye to Obama, being born in Kenya and the rest of it. Well, I looked at the facts myself, and I've got an article about it at WhatReallyHappened.com. And anybody who's listened to this show or read my website understands I am not an Obama supporter. I do not agree with this man on a great many issues of policy. But in the spirit of accuracy, the confusion over Barack Obama's birth certificate has to do with the fact that his father, biological father, was Frank Marshall Davis, not Barack Obama Sr. Obama is a love child from the 60s, a very common occurrence, and hardly something he can be held responsible for. And it was very common practice back in the 1960s when a young woman with a love child married somebody, rather than go through the very long, drawn-out, expensive process of formal adoption, they would just reissue the birth certificate with the new husband's last name. And it happened all the time. That's where the altered birth certificate comes from. Obama was born in Hawaii. Both of his parents were U.S. citizens, because Frank Marshall Davis was certainly an American citizen and a veteran. And it's a completely different issue. There is no question Ted Cruz was born in Canada. Only one of his parents is an American citizen. He's born outside the United States. It doesn't really matter anyway. He's pulling single digits. He's not going to be in the race anyway. Now then, here's an interesting story. They're still waving this Confederate flag, ooh, the evil Confederates and everything. And apparently some protesters desecrated the grave of the Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest. Didn't want to wait for the official disinterment authorized by the city council. Just dig him up and get him out of here because he's racist, he's Confederate, and he's all the rest of it. Well, let's do a little digging into history here to find out what's going on. There is no question that Nathan Bedford Forrest was an officer in the Confederate Army. He was a general. Nobody's hiding that. The claim that he was a founding member of the KKK can't be substantiated. It seems to be an urban legend, but there's a fascinating book, Nathan Bedford Forrest's Redemption. This came out in 2010. And the research shows that Nathan Bedford Forrest, like so many other people, went through a change of heart. Following the loss of the Confederacy, he converted to Christianity in 1878. And after the Civil War was over, Nathan Bedford Forrest worked with many former Union soldiers, and he hired former slaves in his business ventures. At one point, he was investigated by the federal government's Freedmen's Bureau to make sure he was complying with the law regarding his black employees. The complaint was he was paying them more than the federal government thought they should receive. It was setting a bad precedent for the other former slaves who were now working for wages. Nathan Bedford Forrest allowed his former slaves to own and carry guns. Forrest was far more respectful of the black man's rights than the U.S. federal government was at the same time. The Freedmen's Bureau chief referred to the former general as just too liberal toward his black employees. But because he carried the wrong flag and because the mob think is taking over, they're going to desecrate this guy's grave. And that's what it is. It's mob think. And they're trying to use that mob think to build race hate between the whites and the blacks, again, as an issue to be exploited for next year's election, if not an outright civil war justifying a military takeover. Stop acting like sheep. They're counting on you to be that way. Don't. Think for yourself. Find out your own facts. We all know this government lies, cheats, steals to get what it wants. The corporate media is their willing handmaiden. You're better than this. Don't get suckered in because of a flag that wasn't even really the flag of the Confederacy. It's all a hoax. It's all a giant hoax to manipulate you, to get you angry with your fellow American and not paying attention to what this government is doing as it drags this nation into a new world war that we are probably going to lose. All righty, we're coming up here on another commercial break. We're going to come back here. We're going to talk about Planned Parenthood. A third video has surfaced showing the Planned Parenthood vice president negotiating to sell the body parts of aborted babies and complaining that these science companies aren't willing to pay what these body parts are worth. And there's a huge political backlash, and everybody's pointing fingers, and the feminists are all up in arms. This is an attack on women's health rights. No, it isn't. It's about chopping up little babies and selling them for money. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And yet another video has surfaced in which the vice president of Planned Parenthood is negotiating for the sale of parts from aborted babies and trying to raise the price as high as possible. Now, this has prompted a great deal of outrage over the way these remains are being handled, because for a lot of people, these are human beings. There's no point in time where not human, now human. It's a continuum. And it's very upsetting. Now, the defenders of Planned Parenthood are out there saying that this is just an attack on a woman's right to choose. This is an attack to limit the health choices for women. No, it isn't. But it does raise a question here. Planned Parenthood not only provides the abortions, they provide counseling for women who find themselves pregnant. And now that we know there is this added financial incentive, the question has to be asked, is Planned Parenthood encouraging women to have abortions in order to have these materials to sell? Are they really providing objective information to these young women? Or are they merely dragging them in for a rich harvest of biological material? A fast buck. It certainly does not make Planned Parenthood look like they're serving the community, women or otherwise. It's another get-rich-quick. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Peter out in California. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I just was reading on a couple of sites, like basically liberal sites, Daily Cause, people like that Planned Parenthood was under massive hacker attack and all this kind of stuff. And I have barely seen anything on the organ selling at all. And I also want to remind the audience that Israel, that's one of their big industries, is organ trafficking. And a couple of years ago, there were New Jersey and New York mayors and rabbis involved in a huge ring of smuggling and harvesting organs. But at any rate, I find it almost it's pretty amazing that you don't find it at all in the corporate media.
Well, Planned Parenthood is one of the icons, coming out of the feminist movement of the 1990s. That yes, a woman has a right to abort her baby and doesn't need the permission of the father or husband to do it, which has always been an issue for me. If a guy marries a woman with the express expectation, we're going to have kids, then the woman changes her mind and gets an abortion, the guy has nothing to say about it, and that's the attitude of the feminists. No, you have nothing to say about it. You're there to pay the bills. That's it. And, you actually, husbands cannot divorce wives on the grounds of, hey, we agreed to a child in the prenup and she's reneged on the deal. Oh, no. If he divorces her to find a woman who wants to have children, he's still going to get cleaned by the courts.
Yes, it's obviously terribly unfair, but there's no coverage in the corporate media whatsoever.
Well, there's a little bit of coverage, but it's always with the spin about, these dastardly conservatives, they're attacking Planned Parenthood. This was a sting. They went in there with unauthorized video cameras and set these people up. And again, this whole idea that this is somehow an attack on a woman's right to choose, and women's health freedom. That's how they're trying to spin this. And no, it's got nothing to do with those. It has to do with the fact that Planned Parenthood is making money off of these chopped up, aborted babies, and because of that financial incentive, we cannot trust that the information, the counseling they're giving to young women who come through their doors is unbiased and objective.
Michael, also, have you been following this stuff about Trump and Ivana Trump saying she was raped when they were married? And you've been following that at all?
No, I haven't.
Just came out today. Ivana Trump, said that she was raped while she was married, and blah 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 blah. She has since then sort of pissed backwards on that story and said, no, not really. But people are all over Trump, which it would be it's not right for a husband, in my opinion, to rape a wife either. But on the other hand, people are getting down on Trump. This is not even proven to be true, but nobody's really even the person, Ivana Trump, backed out of her allegation.
Oh, yeah, but going back to the 1990s militant feminism, their attitude was that rape was such a serious accusation that even innocence could not be allowed as a defense.
But yet, Michael, remember, Bill Clinton was actually accused of rape in the White House.
Yes.
And nobody, that had no leg with the press.
Well, they're giving Trump the Ron Paul treatment. That is obvious to everybody, and the more they pound on him, the higher his poll numbers are going, because we all remember what the GOP leadership did to Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. We see the pattern again, and we're not going to fall for it a second time.
Yeah, but it's interesting that all these things, the rape stuff with Trump, and how differently it's treated from the actual allegations of multiple people, that Clinton did rape them in the Oval Office.
Well, look how they covered up the Franklin scandal, with all the diddling of little boys in the White House. And, this is just a character assassination, and it's a smear. And as you say, Ivana has backed off the story herself. Somebody may have put her up to it, just say that he raped you in the marital bed. And, again, from the 1990s militant feminism, the attitude was that, if a wife did not initiate sex with the husband, then it was rape by default. And it was completely out of control. And they even had the situation where if a woman voluntarily went to bed with a man and then regretted it the morning after, it was okay for her to say that she'd been raped. I mean, that's how completely out of control this whole thing got, and it looks like they're heading that same direction again.
Well, Michael, I just want to, my final little observation is, it seems to me with Hillary taking her stance on feminism as her big stand, false as it is, but all these things are cropping up with sort of a feminist backdrop. You know, the Trump thing, the whole deal with Planned Parenthood being under attack, or they say that, you know, they're being under attack. It just seems that all these things are now emerging that really weren't emerging, you know, 2 years ago.
Well, it's all being driven by the campaigns. And Planned Parenthood is under attack, but on the other hand, they have engaged. Yeah, they deserve it. They're doing something that is very underhanded, and I think the obvious question at this point is, if Planned Parenthood is marketing the remains of these aborted babies for commercial gain, is the counseling they're giving to unwed mother or any pregnant woman coming through their doors, is it really unbiased and objective, or is it there to keep the pipeline filled with material for sale?
And how's that gone on to their books if that's the source of income? How's that? Are they, you know, how are they, you know, marking that in their books?
I have no idea, and until somebody leaks those books out, we don't really know. But the videotapes are very damning. They've got 3 of them out there now. I'm almost willing to bet there's probably more still to come. And this is not an issue about a woman's right to choose. It's not an attack on women's right to health care. This is a very nefarious behavior by what purports to be a beneficial charitable organization serving women's health. And as I said, the next question has to be, if Planned Parenthood is making money out of these chopped up babies, you know, are they counseling women who come through their doors in order to keep that supply line going rather than what is best for the woman and the unborn child? That's the next question.
Amen to that.
Okay.
Thanks, Michael.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. We're coming up on our top of the hour news break. When we come on back, we're going to be talking with Michael Everett about survivalism, because this was something that was very much in vogue not too long ago. Now, Claire and I, we've always been sort of focused on this. When we lived in Southern California, we went through several major earthquakes. We had our earthquake kit. Today we call it our tsunami hurricane collapse of the government kit. But a lot of people seem to be kind of pulling away from this. They're getting lured back to dependency. I think we need to revive this idea of being prepared to take care of yourself and your family in the event the system you're dependent on collapses. We'll be back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And joining us on the phone now is Michael Everett of Fortress Survival. And, Michael, thank you for spending time with us today.
I appreciate you guys having me.
Well, the reason I wanted to have you on the show here is that we know that a lot of times we see social phenomenon that are sort of a trend or a fashion, and we saw a lot of survival be very popular in the public mind not too long ago, but interest seems to be kind of fading at a time when the indicators seem to suggest we should be paying more attention than ever before in terms of being able to support ourselves and our loved ones if the current grid that we are forced to be dependent on should collapse, either economically or logistically. And so I wanted to kind of have you on the show, first of all, to talk about what Fortress Survival offers as products, and second, what are you seeing out there in terms of public awareness of survival issues, of preparedness? Is it on the wane? What can we do to revive it?
Well, I don't really think it's on the wane, to be honest with you. We meet hundreds, even thousands of people a week. You know, we got people that go all over the country for us promoting and selling our products, and you know, we've actually had a phenomenal last 6 months. But basically, what Fortress Survival is, we started this company really out of necessity. You know, my best friend's a lieutenant with the Highway Patrol. He got in a shootout a couple of years ago, and luckily he didn't get hit. But you know, they were exchanging rounds on the interstate with M4s. And I asked him, you know, where was your level 3 at? And he said, well, anything that's not issued, you know, above and beyond
as far as that goes, we have to pay for, and it's extremely expensive. So we started doing research and, figured out we could make it at an affordable price. And, that's kind of how we got into it. But, this was back in 2012. And since then, it's just exploded onto the scene. You've got a lot of little pop-up companies that's trying to get into this business and, try and make a quick buck and all that. And we're not those people. We in-house everything. You won't have to wait on your order. I'm not going to take your money and say it's going to be 16 weeks before you get it shipped to you and this and that. But really in the last 6 months, I think a lot of people are waking up, and it's, you're kind of in the club now or you're not. I mean, if you can't see the writing on the wall at this point, something's wrong with you. Is kind of what I think. From a business standpoint, though, we're absolutely booming.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And, with regard to the personal body armor, I think it's a good idea for people to have. But we know that there has been talk lately, it seems to be fading off in the U.S. Congress, about banning body armor above a certain level for ordinary citizens. The attitude is you don't need those, you don't need the guns, the police will take care of you. But I keep thinking back to that shootout over at the Empire State Building in New York a while ago where 9 bystanders were shot, all of them by the New York Police Department. And I think if somebody wants to have some kind of body armor, they should not need the government's permission to get it. Certainly people who are with the independent media, as we go into some of these areas of protest where there are obvious agent provocateurs trying to commit acts of violence, it makes sense that this be available, affordable to ordinary people. What else does Fortress Survival carry aside from the body armor, if you don't mind my asking?
Sure. Well, we partnered up with Wise Foods. We carry their line of freeze-dried food, and we also carry tactical gear and tactical first aid products. Really cool stuff coming out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. They do a bunch of stuff for the military there, so we have them make up our bags for us. And next week, we're actually very excited about launching a new line of lightweight level 3A, 100% made in America Kevlar for adults, and we designed a kids line. We're going to be the only ones in the nation manufacturing a Kevlar level 3A vest for kids and adults, and it's all going to MSRP for under $300. So we're about to blow the doors off the market as far as the body armor goes. And they've been talking this and that about trying to outlaw guns and outlaw this and outlaw that, and it's ridiculous what this government's doing, but, thankfully we've only got 18 months left of the knucklehead that's running this company, our country, and,
Yeah, but we could get something worse here. I mean, the thing that keeps running through my mind is, what if all those people in that church in Charleston had been wearing body armor?
Exactly.
Exactly. It just makes sense, between the fact that we've got an out-of-control domestic police force that is murdering innocent Americans more than the terrorists are, these mass shooters whose brains are melted on these prescription psychiatric medications. We have an inalienable right to self-defense, to protect our persons against whatever threat is out there. And, the gun grabbers are out there trying to make the argument that ordinary citizens don't need a gun to return fire, but it really is very difficult to make an argument that we should not be allowed to have available to us body armor if we live in high crime, high violence areas. And the whole idea is, as far as I can tell, the thinking is they want Americans not only disarmed, but completely vulnerable in order to keep us under control.
Sure. Yeah, and Hitler did the same thing.
Yes.
I'm sure you know your history and all that, but yeah, they're trying to pick apart this and that and whatever, and they're gonna push people into a corner, and it's not gonna be pretty. But back when Bill Clinton banned assault rifles in the 90s and all that, they grandfathered in. So I would say if anyone was on the fence about getting body armor, I would definitely make a play on it now. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And, from a business standpoint, like I said, people are waking up down here in the lower 48. I mean, we're packing these things out the door just almost as quick as we can make them, which is a good thing. I'm glad to see people's waking up and and they're starting to be concerned. You know, you can't hardly turn on the news anywhere and see chaos and mayhem going on, and, you know, are they going to outlaw martial arts and knives and baseball bats and everything else? I mean, come on, you know.
Well, they've been talking about knives. They've been talking about knives and the rest of it. But you need to remember. And first of all, I have body armor as well. It's stenciled press on the front and the back. You know, when I'm carrying a camcorder. But there is a United States Supreme Court decision. It was United States versus Miller, which basically said that the Second Amendment reserves to the American people the same arms as carried by the uniformed military. And the uniformed military have body armor, not always the best, but they do have body armor. And under that Miller decision, the government really cannot forbid Americans from owning body armor, because body armor is a defensive, passive tool. You know, somebody wearing body armor isn't using the body armor to harm other people. They're just protecting themselves. And it is rather amazing to hear all these politicians talking about, well, anybody who buys body armor, they obviously intending bad things. No, we're just intending that we want to live.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. You know, we do a lot of business with a lot of different people, and to be honest with you, a lot of our business is coming from off-duty military. You know, they see our product, they realize that it's, you know, a superior product over the ceramics that they're wearing, and we're selling a ton of that to those guys, and a lot of civilians and so on and so forth. But I'll tell you that, you know, we've been working for the last 6 months on this 100% American-made Level 3A Kevlar, and we designed a kids line. And, you know, over the last, you know, probably 2 or 3 years, everyone's saying, you know, you got anything for kids? You got anything for kids? So we put the money into it. We did our, you know, research and development, and we designed a really cool setup that we're actually going to launch next week. It's going to be on our website, and people should check it out. You know, it's not going to break the bank either.
Okay,
you know,
well,
we got into this.
We got to take a break. 4 minutes for commercials. We'll be back here with Michael Everett and Fortress Survival after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Michael Everett of Fortress Survival, and we're talking about Level 3A body armor. I actually got an email saying, well, if you're making them for the kids, why aren't you making them for the dogs? So there may be a new market out there. And if you don't mind, I'd kind of like to pull away from the body armor and talk about some of your other product line, because I'm going through your website here. I'm looking at the Commando chest rig, where it's basically a vest, and it's got all the little points for little modular holders to go onto. And the first thing that occurred to me looking at that is what a cool camera vest you can make out of that, with all the mixing and matching for lenses and various things, because that's always a big problem for people who are out there, trying to take the camera gear they need, and it doesn't quite fit in the prefab pockets. Obviously, you've got these very high-quality medical kits here, and this is a point at which I'd like to talk to all of our listeners who are into being prepared. Remember that even the best survival gear does have a shelf life. And if you've bought a medical kit and it's been sitting in your closet for 5-10 years, it's time to take a look and make sure that the stuff is still good there. Some of the low-end kits, like you'll get at the big volume discount stores, they're only good for maybe 2 years. And you need to keep an eye out for that. Same thing with the food kits. They last a very long time, but if you've had yours in the garage since Clinton was in office the last time, you need to take a look and make sure you're up to date on all of this stuff. So, Michael, what other products are you carrying? I see you've got these night vision binoculars. Those are always a lot of fun to have. And what other things? Knives, other stuff?
Sure, yeah. We carry, you talk about that Commando chest rig. That's a tactical setup that actually the Marine Corps wears. It holds 6 30-round high-cap M4 mags. We partnered up with Kabar. We carry Kabar knives, Gerber knives, just, you know, the good stuff. You know, when we started this company, I didn't want to put anything on our website or in our store that I wouldn't personally use myself. So it's you know, kind of, we got the good stuff at the good price. You know what I mean? We're not.
I can see that. This is all quality stuff. I'm familiar enough with the various product lines, because we've talked to other survival companies as well. This is all top quality stuff.
Yeah. Yep. And, you know, as far as, you know, if people need a bug out bag, you know, a lot of people talk about putting one together. We've got one on our website. It's a 5-day emergency survival kit for one person. It's got food, water, first aid, hygiene, tent, you know, all your basic stuff. It's $65. You know what I mean? If you start factoring in, you know, the cost, if you know, went to one of the retail stores and put a bag together like that, it could be in the hundreds, you know. So that we're trying to make this stuff accessible to everyone and give everyone the highest quality products available for the money. You know, we're not out there trying to make 40, 50, 80%, you know, we're good with 10 to 12%. My wife and I are very fortunate in business. You know, our claim to fame happened years ago when we started a welding company. We made, you know, we did very well, and I'm passionate about this. That's why the prices are what they are. People need to price check us, and you know, if you're on my website, those prices scratched out, that's what the MSRP is, and you can see what our price is. In some cases, it's 40, 50% less than what others are retailing their products for the same thing, and we have free shipping site-wide, so.
Well, you know, again, you need to understand, if you're buying for survival circumstances, you have to have the very best that you can get. I remember many years ago when we were starting to build our survival kit, we bought one of these hand-powered generator radio flashlight units that was, the Red Cross had approved it. It had the Red Cross seal,
yeah.
And we put it in our little survival kit, and I went to do a check on it 6 months later, and the plastic case was already beginning to literally rot away and turn into this goo and gum. And so there are, unfortunately, a lot of the newcomer fly-by-night companies, they figure they're going to sell you survival gear on the assumption that 9 times out of 10 you're never actually going to need it, and therefore they can cut corners and use cheaper materials. And that's exactly the opposite. You need to pay the money for your survival gear and know for a fact that if you need it, it will be there and doing what it's supposed to do, and you're not going to be standing out in the middle of nowhere with this red pile of goo with the Red Cross stamp all over it that it doesn't do what you need it to do. You're justified in getting the very best that you can. I'm looking through your website. This is obviously all top quality gear.
Yeah.
All right, so
I appreciate that. You know.
Give everybody your website again, and we are running a banner ad for Fortress Survival on the main page at WhatReallyHappened.com, so you can click through and get to them. But for those listeners who don't visit my website, both of them, please give your website URL.
Sure. It's www.fortresssurvivalllc.com.
That's FortressSurvivalLLC.com, and we've got a few minutes left here before we're going to let you go. I am delighted that you are reporting a boom in business, because out here, even though we deal with we're in the middle of hurricane season. We actually had snow on the Big Island week and a half ago. I've noticed that the enthusiasm for storable food, storable water, various other things is kind of fading away. Everybody's kind of getting complacent again. And to me, that's very alarming, because it does seem like we're in this trend toward the breakdown of these large institutional, economic, governmental systems that we've all allowed ourselves to become dependent on. So I'm glad to hear that your experience is the opposite of mine. That's very reassuring.
Yep, that's good. I'm telling you, people are starting to wake up, and even people that shock me. You know, we've got sometimes liberals, very liberal people come up and say, "Hey, you know what? You know, I don't really agree with all this stuff, but you know what? Might as well be safe than sorry." And you know, it's almost comical, because even a lot of those people that are trying to, you know, scream and yell about guns this and guns that, they'll come into a prepper show or somewhere we're at and say, "Hey, you know what? I'll take 4 or 5 of those," and which is good, you know, because the writing's on the wall, and once this stuff goes down, where you're at and what you got is what you got, you know, and it's that should be a sobering reality for everyone listening to this program. And I'm not a fearmonger or anything like that.
Before you look at the price tags or anything, just remember, it is better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it, is really what it comes down to. Okay?
Exactly.
All right. Well, listen, Michael Everett, thank you very much for spending time with us on our show today. The URL, one more time, is fortresssurvivalllc.com. There's a banner ad at WhatReallyHappened.com that'll take you to the website. I'm looking at all this stuff. I'm probably going to place an order myself for some of these bits and pieces here, but it's all top quality stuff. It will be there when you need it. And that's really the bottom line on all of this. So thank you, Mike. We're going to let you go. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. That was a fun interview. And, yeah, I'm looking at that vest. Forget about survival. What a cool camera vest you can make with that thing. All righty. Story coming out now from RIF.com. Will the Hillary scandals ever stop? Of course not. There are so many of them. And apparently another one of these little covert U.S. coup d'etats is surfacing. The former president of Honduras, Manuel Zelaya, has started giving interviews talking about how the U.S. came in and overthrew the elected government of Honduras in 2009 and put in a U.S. puppet regime, and Hillary Clinton was in the middle of that as well. So there are so many Hillary scandals we can never possibly keep track of all of them, but we're going to try. Okay, let's see. Cincinnati braces for footage release of campus cop killing of Sam Dubose. Apparently they're saying the video is not good in terms of not supporting the police account of what was going on. Over in Cleveland, in what is being called a sick joke, the Cleveland Police Union is doing a fundraiser for a police officer by raffling off a gun that's just like the one that killed an unarmed man. Own this simulated piece of history or whatever. Now, contrary to the propaganda coming out from the gun grabbers, the majority of Americans are now saying an armed populace is the best solution to mass shootings. Because these mass shooters, their brains melted on prescription psychiatric medication, go into the gun-free zones. They keep an eye out for anybody in a uniform, and as soon as the coast is clear, they unload. And the only thing that can stop them are the intended victims. That actually happened in Cincinnati a couple of days ago. Guy walks in with two guns, starts firing shots, fortunately didn't hit anybody, stopped in his tracks by a citizen with a concealed carry permit. That's the reality of what's going on. Okay. Amazing video we put on WhatReallyHappened.com. It's of a video taken at the RIAT Air Show in Great Britain showing a Polish Air Force MiG-29 jet doing this amazing, spectacular takeoff from the runway. And there's no way the F-35 can do that. It's already obsolete. It's behind the state of the art, and it's not even in active service yet. The F-22, so far, all I can find is it's being used for bombing civilians in Syria. Has yet to actually be in a dogfight of any kind here. And, getting back to the F-35, story coming out of Bloomberg, no less. The Marine Corps version of the F-35 was used in a 12-day training exercise at sea. They had 6 of the F-35s. It's the most complex version of the aircraft. And they were available for flights only half the time they were needed. They have a 50% downtime. And the official conclusion of the Marine Corps is that this is poor reliability. Shipboard reliability, maintenance issues likely to present significant near-term challenges, which is a polite way for saying it's a hangar queen. Spends all of its time in the hangars. All right, let's talk about Windows. We're just days away from the official launch of Windows 10, which you can download for free if you are so inclined. And already there are major problems. One of the things Windows 10 has been doing that has angered the beta testers is you have no control over the updates. And we're not just talking about updates to Windows 10 itself, Microsoft has taken it upon itself to enforce updates to drivers. The problem is some companies like NVIDIA do their own driver updates and don't go through Microsoft. And apparently some of this mandated update driver stuff has actually messed up the graphics cards of a lot of people using this. Another little display of arrogance coming out of Redmond, Washington. So, as of the most recent update to Windows 10, they've added a tool that allows you to hide or block unwanted Windows 10 updates, which is telling us Microsoft is going to be even more reckless with updates than they have been in the past. Another little feature that people are upset about is that Windows 10 is sharing your Wi-Fi passwords with people who are listed as your friends. And it's part of a system called Wi-Fi Sense. It's been in Windows Phone for a while. And it will send Wi-Fi passwords to your contacts who can then connect to any Wi-Fi networks you are using. It's on by default. I don't want my friends logging onto my personal Wi-Fi network. Windows 10 seems to think, hey, we're letting in the NSA. Why not let your friends in? Your enemies are already there. Valve's Steam, huge platform in the PC gaming market, they got hit by a hack account. They're not happy about that. Now, over in the Parliament, in Great Britain, pardon me, we were just talking about this Deputy Speaker of the Parliament has had to step down because of a sex and drug video that surfaced. But apparently, access to pornographic websites from within the Parliament computer system is running about 700 times a day, or 250,000 attempts over the last year. There you go. Now then, going to grab a real quick caller here. Kevin in New Hampshire, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Kevin, are you there? Oh, he hung up. All right, moving along. Now, if you use the iPhone or the iPad, any of their products, you're probably already aware that they come with a special cable. And it is more than just a piece of wire. Inside the cable is a microchip that identifies itself as an authorized accessory for your iPhone or iPad. I got this one when I upgraded to my iPhone 5 about 6 months ago. And yes, it's got a year warranty on it if I feel like waiting for a new cable for a week and a half. This one died after just 6 months. The little chip failed. It still works as a connector and a wire, but the iPhone refuses to allow it to charge the iPhone. I had to go down to a cell phone company and buy a replacement, of which they only had one, and it cost $25 for basically what amounts to wire and some jacks. Okay, let's see. All right, we're dealing with some caller issues here. And again, this is the idea that they want to license the accessories to make more money that goes with this. I mean, $25 for a cable. And you need to be very careful because a lot of office supply stores are selling cables that look like they would work and they won't. It has to actually say on there, you know, for iPhone, iPad, licensed, paid a piece of the action to Apple to get that. And it's very, very angering because of, it's all driven by the money because you're not only paying the licensing fee to Apple, you're paying for the cost of that microchip to be there. And that's kind of tacky. All right, we're coming up on our last commercial break of the day. When we come back, we're going to go ahead and catch up on all this human-caused global warming stuff that has been collecting over the last several days here. And there's a lot of it out there, and especially since Hillary Clinton is going to make global warming a part of her campaign, let's start hammering away at that. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today here, and I'm still getting emails asking if Fortress Survival is going to make those grade 3A body armors for dogs. I think there might actually be a market there. Anyway, let's talk about human-caused global warming. I've had a bunch of stuff saved up here. We're going to go through it all. Canadian air may break cold weather record in the county. This is being reported in the Bangor Daily News. So they're already seeing the big chill coming down north across the border. Story over in the Daily Mail in Great Britain. Heat wave? No chance. Summer's off with warnings of showers, gales, and below average temperatures blighting Britain until mid-August. Now, we're still seeing from the Carbonazis where they'll find a hot temperature somewhere in the Midwest and say, see, it's broiling out there. And we know that a lot of these temperatures are generated from weather stations located at airports surrounded by aircraft belching out tons of burning kerosene. But it turns out, according to a study quoted over in Stephen Goddard, the number of days in the Midwest that qualify as hot are only occurring half as often as they did 100 years ago. Yes, they're getting hot days. They're not happening as often. Another bout of heavy snow in southwest Greenland taking place. And, of course, we're all still dealing with the aftermath of the Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker, the Amundsen, which had to be rerouted to Hudson Bay to help clear it of heavy ice that was starting to impinge on commercial shipping. They basically had to cancel their original mission, which was to study how global warming is melting the Arctic ice cap, and that has now gone away. The eastern Arctic sea ice coverage is the highest so far this millennium, which admittedly is only 15 years long, but it sounds good. And there's another story over there in the Telegraph about how this thick Arctic ice has made fools of all those poor warmistas who are out there. Arctic sea ice recovery, huge increase in the amount of old, thick Arctic ice over the last 3 years. And they're saying within 5 years, the Arctic ice will be back to the levels of the 1980s. Well, this has not discouraged the Carbonazis, who are still clinging desperately to their reputations and their funding. And there was this article in the Washington Post, no less, saying that there's a new theory out there about how human-caused global warming creates larger Arctic and Antarctic ice caps. Because the ice is melting on the continent of Antarctica, and it's flowing out to the ocean where it's refreezing. Oh, well, if it's warm enough to melt the ice on the landmass, why is it refreezing on the water? And it's just another classic case of trying to come up with anything that sounds reasonably scientific to go on pushing that agenda. And the alarmists are still out there. Climate change drove the woolly mammoths to extinction. Actually, I think being hunted and eaten by our ancestors might have had something to do with it, not to mention those who got sucked down in the La Brea tar pits. But it's all the fault of global warming. The world would just be wonderful. Now, and they're getting really desperate out there. They are getting desperate out there. There's this professor over at Cambridge University who is out there saying big oil-funded death squads are trying to murder him because he knows too much about global warming. And those evil oil companies, they're trying to kill him to silence him. And then they built giant refrigeration cooling units. And they've planted them in space over the polar caps using reptile alien flying saucers, hiding behind the chemtrails, which is why you can't see them, just to make the global warming people look foolish with all this Arctic ice. They really are getting kind of desperate out there. Now, here's another little article coming out of warisacrime.org talking about the elephant in the room everybody is refusing to look at least over in the Carbonazi camp, and that is the Pentagon's massive carbon footprint. The Carbonazis want us to pay a carbon tax. They want us to limit our carbon output. They want us to use this product or that product and everything. Nobody talks about the war machine. According to its own study, in 2013, the Pentagon consumed fuel equivalent to 90 million barrels of crude oil. That amounts to 80% of the total fuel usage by the entire federal government. Now, if that were burned as jet fuel, and most of it is, it would produce 38,700,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. And the Pentagon figures do not include the carbon produced by all of the fires started by bombs dropped in 2013. Never hear the Carbonazis saying, you know, this war machine is causing a lot of damage. Oh, no, it's your plastic bags and your non-recycled bottles that's the problem. Now, there's another little story This is in the Daily Mail. Underwater eruptions that created 2 new islands in the Red Sea could reveal a hidden volcanic region. Okay, this is a reminder. Nobody knows how many active volcanoes and thermal vents there are on the floors of the world's oceans. And if they don't know that, and they don't, then anybody who says they've calculated the human contribution to ocean warming is just out there with swag, which means a scientific wild-ass guess. They don't know. They're just guessing. They're coming up with the numbers their funders are telling them to come up with. Come up with something that makes it look like humans are warming the planet so we can tax and control them. It's a giant fraud. It is a giant fraud. All right, coming up here to the top of the hour, a couple more stories. This gets back to the issue we're talking about, the F-35, the Independence-class littoral combat ships, the disaster with the USS Donald Cook. And there's an article over here in Sputnik News, the newest American weapons will not survive actual battle. And that's absolutely true. We have seen this repeated time and time again. The weapons will always do well in these very tightly controlled tests done by the Pentagon to justify awarding of these contracts to the military contractors. And then when these weapons get out there in the real world, they don't perform the same way. I mean, all of these tests of the interceptors for the ballistic missile defense system, the incoming targets are coming in on announced times and bearings. They have radio locator beacons, something a real enemy is not going to do. These tests are rigged to sell the product. And again, you need to go back to this book and movie, The Pentagon Wars, directed by Richard Benjamin, and it's based on the true story of the development of the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. And if you have not seen this movie, it is hilarious. And it's based on real events. I especially love that thing about the sheep tests. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm not going to spoil the ending of the movie for you. Rosebud is the name of the sled. And another story coming out of Russia Insider. In a war with Russia, NATO doesn't stand a chance. NATO's principal military arm is the United States, and our military is drawn down. Our military force is exhausted. They're demoralized. Our stockpiles are drawn down. And these ultra-modern high-tech weapons aren't built to last. I mean, here we've got the F-35. It's first time out on these drills with the Marines. 50% downtime. It's amazing. By the way, under the category of your tax dollars at work, the federal government spent $222,000 to study how men look at women when they drink, meaning the men. And this is intended to limit male-initiated sexual aggression toward female acquaintances. This is playing right into that whole, oh, it's a rape crisis, men are the beasts and the aggressors. And they spent $222,000 studying how men look at women when they drink. Well, the only woman I look at when I drink is Claire, and if I've had too much to drink, I can't even see her. So there was $222,000 of tax money totally wasted. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Please make a point of calling your local talk radio station. Point them at gcnlive.com. Ask them to carry our programming. We need to get the truth out before we all die in a world war based on lies. We'll be talking to you tomorrow. Aloha, America.